You find yourself in the Shitamachi district of Tokyo at 10:30 p.m. on March 9th, 1945, as air raid sirens wail across the darkened capital. For the residents of these densely packed wooden neighborhoods, this alert seems like just another routine disturbance, indistinguishable from the more than 100 warnings sounded since November. They dismiss the danger because American B-29s typically fly at 30,000 feet, dropping munitions that frequently miss their military targets. But tonight, everything is about to change. Over the next 3 hours, a fleet of 279 Boeing B-29 Superfortresses will unleash 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs. This single event will claim the lives of between 83,000 and 100,000 people, marking it as the deadliest air raid in human history. Survivors will witness more than just the physical incineration of their capital. They will see the complete collapse of the illusion that Japan can continue this war. The bombers are approaching at a shockingly low altitude of 5,000 to 9,000 feet, stripped of most defensive guns to maximize their payload. They are carrying M69 napalm cluster bombs, weapons specifically engineered to ignite firestorms in cities constructed from wood and paper. American planners have spent months analyzing Tokyo's vulnerabilities, even going so far as to test these incendiary devices on replica Japanese buildings at the Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. The unfolding catastrophe will destroy 267,171 buildings and leave over 1 million people homeless, demonstrating the enemy's overwhelming industrial superiority. This shift in strategy comes from Major General Curtis LeMay, who arrived in the Marianas in January 1945 to salvage a failing campaign. The B-29s, sophisticated machines costing $639,188 each, were achieving negligible results due to jet stream winds of 250 miles per hour and persistent mechanical issues. LeMay made a radical decision, briefing his commanders on March 8th regarding tactics that would fundamentally transform aerial warfare. The plan involved flying at night, at low altitude, and swapping high explosives for incendiaries, a strategy so risky that LeMay withheld the details from his superior, General Henry Hap Arnold, to protect him from the fallout should the mission fail. The target was the Shitamachi district, a 10.1 square mile area of wooden structures housing 750,000 people, identified using pre-war insurance maps to pinpoint the most flammable zones. At 12:08 a.m. on March 10th, the Pathfinder B-29s arrived over the capital at just 7,000 feet, flying so low that observers caught in the searchlights could see the crew members inside the glass noses. These lead aircraft dropped M-47 incendiary bombs in a distinct X pattern, targeting the densely populated working-class districts near the Sumida River. This marked the target for the main force, which followed in relentless waves over the next 3 hours, with 279 bombers successfully deploying their loads. Each bomber released approximately 6 tons of incendiaries, primarily E-46 clusters containing M69 napalm bombs, developed by the Standard Oil Development Company. These were designed to penetrate tile roofs and spray sticky napalm that water could not extinguish, causing individual fires to merge within 30 minutes into a unified firestorm. Superheated air generated its own weather system, creating ground-level winds exceeding 100 miles per hour and temperatures reaching 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, producing updrafts powerful enough to toss the 140,000-pound aircraft around like leaves. The human cost is best understood through the eyes of those who lived through it, such as Haruyo Nihei, who was 8 years old at the time. In testimony preserved by the Center of the Tokyo Raids and War Damage, she describes emerging from a shelter to find the world consumed by flames, with burning clothing and debris blowing down the road like a flowing river of fire. Her account includes the harrowing image of a baby burning on a mother's back, and children engulfed in flames yet still attempting to run. Yoshiko Hashimoto, a 24-year-old mother who lost her parents and sister, recorded her survival in documents now held at the National Archives. She describes jumping into the Sumida River to escape the unbearable heat, where her mother placed a protective hood over Yoshiko's head before looking into her eyes for the last time. Yoshiko managed to float to a raft and place her infant upon it, watching with terror as his eyes remained wide open, fearing that he might be dying amidst the chaos. Katsumoto Saotome, who was 12 during the raid, later dedicated his life to collecting these stories, noting in his own historical account that the falling bombs sounded like rain. He was astounded by the sheer intensity of the raid that claimed his parents, poignantly stating that for the survivors, the post-war period is an era that will never truly end. Official Tokyo Metropolitan Police records, discovered in archives after the war, document the immediate and total catastrophe faced by the city's emergency services. A fire department report, classified as most secret until 1952, reveals that 96 fire trucks were destroyed and 88 firefighters were confirmed dead, with their efforts rendered completely ineffective as water evaporated before it could even reach the flames. The final tally estimated a minimum of 80,000 dead, a figure later revised to precisely 83,793 confirmed fatalities. Official records from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, verified by historians from both Japan and the United States, document the sheer scale of the devastation. The firebombing obliterated 267,171 buildings and reduced 15.8 square miles of the city to ash, leaving 1,805 people without homes. The personal reaction of Emperor Hirohito is preserved in the translated diaries of Marquis Kido Koichi, the Lord Keeper of the Privy Seal. On March 18, 1945, the emperor undertook an unprecedented 6-hour inspection of the capital's ruins. Upon his return, Kido recorded that His Majesty was visibly shaken by the devastation and declared that the conflict must be brought to a close as rapidly as possible. This tour served as a decisive turning point, prompting Hirohito to actively seek a path to peace, although 5 agonizing months and 2 atomic strikes would pass before surrender was finally achieved. Post-war analysis of captured documents from the Imperial General Headquarters reveals that Japan's military leadership fully grasped their defenselessness. A report dated March 15, 1945, noted that the enemy had achieved a casualty ratio of 36-1 and incinerated nearly 51 square kilometers, using over 1,600 tons of incendiaries. The assessment concluded that the American forces possessed the inventory to erase every major city in Japan, and frankly admitted that no effective countermeasures existed. Despite this grim reality, some leaders remained obstinate. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, chief of the Naval General Staff, argued in a war council that even if the Americans possessed atomic weapons, their supply would be limited, justifying a continuation of the fight. While history proved this assessment tragically incorrect, it demonstrates that the military elite understood that conventional bombing alone was already inflicting catastrophic damage. From the American perspective, the moral weight of these operations was heavy and acknowledged. General Curtis LeMay later admitted in his autobiography that they had scorched and killed more people in Tokyo that single night than perished in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. Robert McNamara, a statistical analyst for LeMay's command, recalled the general's chilling admission. If the United States had lost the war, they would all have been prosecuted as war criminals. And I believe he is right. Testimonies collected for the United States Strategic Bombing Survey reveal the horror witnessed by the air crews themselves. Major Thomas Power, who led the 314th Wing, described the scene below not as a city, but as a pot of boiling tar. The survey, conducted with access to all records, detailed a firestorm where ground-level winds exceeded 100 miles per hour and temperatures at the center reached 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The human toll of this 6-hour inferno was staggering, with official statistics compiled by American forces with Japanese cooperation offering the most authoritative figures. Casualties included 83,793 confirmed dead and 40,918 injured, though the actual death toll likely exceeded 100,000. The Tokyo raid was merely the opening salvo of a systematic campaign, followed immediately by attacks on Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe, which collectively destroyed over 13 square miles in a matter of days. By the end of the war, B-29 Superfortresses had targeted 66 Japanese cities, incinerating 178 square miles of urban terrain and claiming the lives of between 300,000 and 400,000 civilians. Industrial data compiled by occupation authorities illustrates the collapse of Japan's war capacity, with Tokyo's industrial output slashed by 50%. The raids killed an estimated 22,000 skilled workers, destroyed over 1,400 small factories, and crippled the power grid by 73%. Even facilities not directly hit, such as the Mitsubishi Aircraft Engine Works, ceased production because the workforce was decimated and the subcontractor network had been obliterated. Captured Japanese documents also highlight the military's acute awareness of the insurmountable technological gap between the two nations. While the United States produced 100 B-29s monthly, Japan struggled to build 200 fighters of all types, most of which could not reach the bomber's operational ceiling of 31,000 feet. Japan lacked radar-directed guns, effective night fighters, and the advanced technologies, such as pressurized cabins and centralized fire control, that made the B-29 a weapon the Imperial forces simply could not match. Although the atomic bombings of August 1945 are often cited as the sole cause of the war's end, internal communications show that Japanese leadership knew defeat was inevitable after the March firebombings. Decoded cables from Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo to Ambassador Sato in Moscow revealed desperate attempts to secure Soviet mediation as early as May. Furthermore, Prince Konoe had warned the emperor in February that continuing the war risked a communist revolution, a fear that intensified dramatically after witnessing Tokyo's destruction. The era concluded with a final, tragic gesture from Admiral Takajiro Onishi, the architect of the kamikaze program, who committed ritual seppuku on August 16th to apologize to the spirits of his pilots and urge the survivors to build a peaceful future. In a final, deliberate act of penance, he rejected the mercy of a Kaishakunin, a second who would have ended his suffering, and instead endured 15 hours of agony before finally succumbing to death. While this suicide was not a direct consequence of the Tokyo firebombing, Onishi's death served as the grim culmination of the military leadership's realization that conventional American bombing had already sealed Japan's defeat. The most authoritative statistics, drawn from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey and the records of the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, detail the devastation of March 9th and 10th, 1945. Of the 334 B-29s that participated in the raid, 279 successfully dropped their payloads. These aircraft released 1,665 tons of incendiaries, obliterating 15.8 square miles of the city and destroying 267,171 buildings. The human toll was catastrophic, with 83,793 confirmed dead, although the actual number likely exceeded 100,000. Records indicate 40,918 were injured and 1,805 were displaced. On the American side, losses were limited to 14 B-29s and 96 airmen. Throughout the broader firebombing campaigns, 66 cities were attacked and 178 square miles of urban area were razed. Civilian deaths ranged from 300,000 to 400,000. 8.5 million people were made homeless, and 60 to 70% of the nation's industrial capacity was annihilated. Historical assessments reinforce the magnitude of this impact, as the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the firebombing campaign contributed substantially to Japan's decision to surrender by exposing the hopelessness of continued resistance. Japanese historian Katsumoto Saotome, having spent decades studying these events, stated that the March 10th raid demonstrated Japan's complete helplessness against American technology, noting that while the atomic bombs ended the war, the firebombing had already proven it was lost. Similarly, in his comprehensive study, Downfall, American historian Richard Frank wrote that the firebombing campaign killed more Japanese than both atomic bombs combined and destroyed more urban area than any bombing campaign in history. The morality of targeting civilians remains a subject of intense controversy. Curtis LeMay defended his actions in his 1965 autobiography, posing the stark question of whether one would prefer to kill Japanese or have Americans killed during a state of war. In contrast, historian Michael Sherry, in The Rise of American Air Power, argued that these raids constituted terror bombing, while others like Richard Frank contend they hastened the war's end, saving lives that would have been lost in an invasion. Legally, Japanese courts have consistently ruled that the raids were not illegal under the international law of the time, although a 2007 Tokyo District Court decision characterized the indiscriminate bombing as inherently inhumane. Unlike Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which possess peace museums and international recognition, the memory of Tokyo's firebombing remains relatively obscure. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government maintains only a small memorial hall, and Katsumoto Saotome's private center preserves survivor testimonies. This disparity illustrates how nuclear weapons have overshadowed conventional bombing in post-war memory, despite the firebombing causing comparable or even greater destruction. This selective remembrance fundamentally shapes how you understand the war's conclusion. On March 9th and 10th, 1945, 279 American B-29s transformed the nature of aerial warfare by creating the deadliest firestorm in human history. The raid killed between 83,000 and 100,000 people, destroyed 267,171 buildings, and exposed Japan's absolute vulnerability to American air power. The survivors witnessed more than just the destruction of their capital. They saw the technological and industrial gulf that made Japan's defeat inevitable. Every major Japanese leader who left records acknowledged this reality, even though it took 5 more months and the advent of atomic weapons to make surrender politically feasible. The Tokyo firebombing proved that modern war had become industrialized destruction. Japan, which had entered the conflict believing spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage, discovered that courage meant nothing against an enemy that had turned death into a matter of science and production statistics. When Emperor Hirohito toured the ruins on March 18, 1945, he saw what his people already knew. Japan faced not merely military defeat, but potential annihilation. The B-29s that reduced 15.8 square miles of Tokyo to ash in 6 hours had delivered a message clearer than any propaganda. Resistance meant extinction. The 1,665 tons of incendiaries dropped that night did not just burn buildings. They incinerated Japan's last illusions about its ability to continue the war. In the ashes of 267,171 buildings lay the end of Imperial Japan's ambitions and the birth of a new understanding. When your enemy can destroy your cities at will while you cannot touch theirs, the war is already over. The debate over necessity and morality continues, but the historical facts remain clear. The firebombing of Tokyo was the deadliest air raid in history, killing more people than either atomic bomb, and demonstrating with mathematical certainty that Japan had lost the war. The survivors knew the end was near because they had witnessed the future of warfare, and it belonged entirely to their enemies.